Hey, how's it going? It's your boy Adam Mobalytics, Challenger Coach here, bringing you the High-ELO tier list, but with a slight twist. We're gonna add in some Q&A at the end, so let us know in the comment section below if you like the new format or not. But anyways, let's get right into it. Starting off in the top lane, our S tier roster will be Jax, Maokai, Wukong, Set, Renekton, and Jace. While in God tier, we've got Aatrox and Fiora. As for the changes to the list, we got Camille going from A tier to S tier. She's kind of been fluctuating between A+ and S- over the last couple of patches, but that's mostly based off of her matchups. But we're kind of finally going to settle in on low S tier due to her being a God Slayer, aka beating Aatrox, and also being able to outscale a lot of her lane counters like Renekton. She is still awful into Fiora though, so just keep that in mind. Then we got Jace going from A tier to S tier as well. He's incredibly popular outside of NA. I know, cue the NA Jace memes and the ping diff, but whatever. But seriously, the champion is incredibly popular. He's got a 9% pick rate, he's in the top 5 in High-ELO top lane due to his snowball and lane bully nature. If you're styling on people on Jace, it just feels so good. And not to mention, he's running phase rush as an adaptation more often lately. It's really helped him play more like a really big degenerate because he doesn't have to worry about really getting ganked. He can just proc the phase rush and get away. Outside of that, we moved Hecarim, Soraka, and Lucian to B tier. We did add some of the up and coming top laners to B tier this patch, like Hecarim and Soraka, who Soraka specifically though is actually just amazing on this patch in multiple roles. So if you want to see how to collect some free LP by losing lane and then winning the game anyways, we had a top lane Soraka video. Go check that one out. But if you want to pick something that's like fun and you're gonna win lane but you're gonna lose the game while picking it, then you can also pick Lucian, who just got added to B tier. As for champion that moved down on the list, first up we've got Poppy going from A tier to B tier. Poppy's gonna move down as she really isn't actually doing that well in this patch and is mostly just a counter pick. There was a little bit of hype off of her like initially picking up things like Trinity Force and Death Dance, but that's kind of died down. She's not as strong, mostly just a counter pick, so we're gonna slot her into B. We then also moved Kayle and Ryze from B tier into the Shadow Realm. As scaling top laners, they kind of lost their place in this role in the meta right now in High-ELO. You just can't pick these champions in the top lane and expect to do well. We also removed Volibear, pretty much for the same reason we removed him in low elo. He is getting a change, so there's no real reason playing him until that comes through. There is one change I want to highlight though for this particular patch, and that's Fiora going from S tier to God tier, and it's pretty much the most important one. She currently holds a 58% win rate, a 9.5% pick rate, and a 16% ban rate in Masters Plus. She's currently one of the best 1v9 top laners in the High-ELO meta. Her most popular matchups right now are things like Aatrox, Camille, Jax, Renekton, Aurelia. What's that? She wins pretty much all of them and they're all S tier champions? Yeah, that's right. Though most of Fiora's matchups are skill matchups during the laning phase, the important part about her is she outscales the 1v1 pretty much every single time. This means if your mechanics are on point, you're gonna win the laning phase and you can't really be stopped. You're just gonna be slicing those towers down. But even if you go even, you're gonna naturally win and put a lot of mental strain on your opponents because they know they can't just keep going even with you. You're Fiora. You're gonna win the split push game eventually anyways. Moving down the jungle, our S tier roster will be Elise, Echo, Rek'Sai, and Kayn. And then in God tier, to no surprise, we've got Graves in the lead singer. As for the changes to the list, we've got Jarvan going from B tier to A tier. The jack of all trades jungler makes it back to A tier finally in this patch as a pretty consistent choice with any team comp. He's just kind of doing really strong in most situations, but he's not always the most optimal pick, so just keep that in mind. Then we've got Sek going from off the list to B tier. He's gonna join the High-ELO jungle list as one of those champions looking to abuse the Nimbus Cloak Hex Flash combination to pull off some insane gank pass, along with the phase rush to help him stick onto people and even get behind them to kidnap them with his ultimate. You know, he's a pretty decent flex pick in High-ELO right now. Obviously jungle is not his best role, but he's still doing pretty decently in it. Then we've got Sylas going from off the list to B tier as well. Though his win rate is slightly low, he will make it onto the list as a situational scaling choice. Be warned though, his first clear is just absolutely trash, and I think it's probably the worst one on the entire list. But if you can pull off a level 3 gank or get to your jungle item, then he becomes a pretty big beast during the mid to late game. Speaking of beasts, we got Rengar moving from S tier to A tier. He's mostly going to drop due to how absurdly low his pick rate is, as he tends to only be one-tricked in this particular ELO bracket, and the other S tier champions tend to have double his pick rate, making him kind of not as consistent as them, although we do highly recommend him as a champion and we would place him in A+. A champion I'm not really going to recommend on the patch though is Zac, as he's going to move from A tier to B tier. With a lot of these heavy invade power farming junglers being added to the meta, you know, things like Graves, Kanye, Nidalee. More recently, you know, Zac is just struggling to protect his own jungle and impact the game without getting snowballed on or outscaled. I mean, not outscaled in Nidalee's case, but the rest of them. Gragas will be moving from A tier to B tier, and honestly, he's doing pretty horrible, and he's just struggling to deal with all these Conqueror junglers who outduel him, and is more of a competitive pick than solo queue, even in High-ELO, at least right now. Talia's also kind of in the same boat. She'll be moving from A tier to B tier, and it's very similar to Gragas. She's having a really tough time fighting for map control in this meta, and doesn't really farm that quickly either. And we've got Sejuani going from B tier to off the list. Yankos is going to be really pleased about this one, as Sejuani is being sent to the Shadow Realm, as she's pretty much at the bottom of the charts in pick rate and win rate, and scaling tanks have really no place in High-ELO solo queue at the moment. Well, I mean, unless you're Nunu, but you know, he just spam ganks level 2. Sejuani definitely can't do that. That means that our highlighted change for this particular patch will be Nidalee going from A tier to S tier. The buffs she got were extremely good on this patch. She went from a 55% win rate and a 7% pick rate to a 54% win rate and a 14% pick rate. But wait, Adam, didn't she go down? Yeah, but her pick rate doubled, and it's a pretty hard champion even for people in High-ELO, and she's still maintaining this high of a win rate. It's pretty absurd. When 14% of the population is picking this champion and they're winning that much, she's gotta be pretty good. This is also in part due to how flexible her build is currently. You can go Electrocute, you can go Dark Harvest, you can go full AP one-shot with Liftbane Death Cap, you can go off-tank utility with things like Athenes or Zhonya's, or even I've seen some people start to go Conqueror, and it's become pretty popular with the Bruiser setup with things like Iceborne Gauntlet, Spirit Visage, Rod of Ages. Either way, this is a champion where if you're better than the other jungler mechanically, you can just style on them and invade them and end up 3 levels ahead. On to the mid lane though, where our starting S tier roster will be Kassadin, Twisted Fate, Sylas, Echo, Zoe, and LeBlanc, with the only god tier champion being Syndra, although Zoe is quite close. For the changes to the list, we got Echo moving from A tier to S tier. He's actually just a pretty broken champion on this patch in multiple roles, but in mid lane he holds a 55% win rate, a 7% pick rate, and an 18% ban rate. He's one of the top 5 most played mid laners in High-ELO at the moment, and there's a, although there's a pretty big drop off after the top 3, he's still extremely popular. Honestly, in my opinion, I think his RCD needs another nerf, or, you know, a nerf at all, as I've said this before, but I think he's way too safe for how much damage he does. But if you're looking up for a new mid laner to pick up, definitely Echo is a good choice. Another B positive choice is actually going to be Vladimir going from B tier to A tier. This guy tends to kind of jump up and down on this list, but we're going to keep him in A tier for now, as despite his inability to roam like other mid laners, it appears to not really matter because he is just a straight up monster when it comes to team fighting versus melee heavy divers, which is pretty much the meta right now. So even if your team takes a loss early game, once he's on 2 items and he has flash up, I've seen him win those fights pretty much every single time. Next up, we've got Jace going from off the list to B tier. With the amount of strong AP junglers in the meta, Jace has made a comeback in the mid lane as a champion who can hard bully many assassin champions being played at the moment, especially Kassadin, for example. So if you like playing Jace, definitely consider picking him up right now because he's good in both solo lanes. As for the champions that went down this time around, we've got Katarina going from S tier to A+. Though people scoffed at the nerfs that Katarina's passive damage in the mid game, it did harm her quite a bit in High-ELO, dropping her from a 7% pick rate and a 59% win rate in Masters Plus to a 4% pick rate and a 57% win rate. The nerfs look to have kind of toned her down a bit, and yeah, she is A+ now, as you can't easily rely on just Gunblade and Conquer damage to kill people during the mid game while being down 100 CS. I mean, if I'm gonna be honest here, that probably still works, but just not as well. Then we've got Akali and Azir going from A tier to B tier. These are 2 competitive play monsters, and they're just both heading down as they hold negative win rates and very low play rates even in High-ELO solo queue. At least currently, they're more popular in competitive play than they are in solo queue. I mean, and it is the off season and pros are kind of taking a little bit of a break, taking it easy, but I mean, there are regions besides North America, right? So, I mean, it really shouldn't account for this amount of poor performance. Talia and Nocturne though will be going from B tier to off the list. Speaking of poor performances, both those champions are barely played anymore outside of extremely rare counter pick situations by a small number of players, so we just sent them to the Shadow Realm. A more important change to the list though will be Twisted Fate moving from A tier to S tier. My favorite champion, although Evelynn is a close second, has received an AP buff ratio on 10.6 and then some really nice buffs on 10.10 for his Destiny mana cost, and I mean those were completely needed. And some higher base AD, Twisted Fate became really popular in this patch, and his win rate and play rate skyrocketed in every region. Playing his regular spellbook setup that was popularized by Dopa is still very effective and consistent for, you know, playing a very controlled style based off of wave management and denying the enemy team options to win. But currently on EU West in particular, many people are challenging the style of play by playing a hybrid Twisted Fate, going trendy force into a Hextech item, mostly Gunblade but sometimes GLP, into things like Nashers, Rapid Fire Cannon, or even Zhonya's, and picking up Medjay's a lot of the time. The issue with the normal Twisted Fate setup that Dopa likes to do is it lacks DPS and the damage to carry fights on its own, but with Hybrid Twisted Fate, if you snowball, it can kill people, it can kill a whole team. You win 1v1s really easily, you'll be taking things like Omni Stone and sometimes Ghost Nimbus Cloak to help you kite in DPS even harder. Either way, it doesn't really matter which setup you're doing, he's still going to be an S tier champion, and Twisted Fate is just one of the best anti-assassin picks in the game right now. He's great at stopping dive heavy comps or people trying to make solo plays because he's got a targeted stun on such a low CD. Plus, he suits the heavy roam style meta himself, as he's just going to be able to out-roam and outpace a lot of the champions in the early game. Plus, I will be adding his new Twisted Fate setup to our champion pages once it gets a little bit more popular, so feel free to bookmark that page if you're a Twisted Fate main. Into the bot lane we go with our starting S tier roster being Misfortune, Varus, Vayne, Kai'Sa, and Kalista, with our god tier being Ezreal and Aphelios. For the changes, we actually don't have that many until the bot lane buffs come in, so it's mostly just cleaning up the list, and oddly enough, none of the marksmen will move places except for Misfortune falling out of god tier to S tier, as the reduced movement speed made her a lot more vulnerable in the early game. It doesn't really allow her to kind of struck down the lane and chase you down with her E and easily kill you, or just very easily walk away from ganks. She's more vulnerable in the early game now. In terms of the actual changes, we've got Cassiopeia going from A tier to B tier. With enchanters becoming a lot more popular and stronger, Cassio moves down in priority as she pretty much needs a frontline support with CC to lock people down for her, so, you know, at least to unlock her true potential. Things like Lulu and Cassio, that sounds just like an awful balling combination, at least compared to Lulu Aphelios, you know what I mean? So she's not really up there anymore. In terms of other changes, we've got Talia going from B tier to off the list, as well as Heimerdinger going from B tier to off the list as well. We're just removing some of the extremely underplayed mage options in the bot lane who don't really do well currently, although let's be real now in the bot lane, who's gonna miss Heimerdinger? Besides maybe Tyler 1, who, now that I'm thinking about it, might not even care that much anymore because he's kind of an Ivern one trick now, which I think is more respectable than Heimerdinger. I don't really know, to be honest. I'll defer to people in the comment section on this one. That means that our highlighted change will be Soraka going from off the list to B tier. It's not that popular yet, but we did place it in B tier for now, but I'm going to make a prediction that it's going to reach A tier or even S tier, and then it's going to get nerfed when it becomes more popular. It currently holds a 61% win rate and a 1.5% pick rate. I actually played this myself after losing to Burix and taking it in the mid lane and seeing some other pros playing it, and I mean pretty much in every single role besides jungle. For now, and it's actually pretty broken, and when I say broken, I really mean it. I will predict this to be a top tier pick within 1 or 2 patches maximum. It works best with frontline supports like Alistar for example, but it can even work with other enchanters like Senna for example, although she's more of a hybrid. The issue with this pick is it just scales way too quickly into being an undeniable force in teamfights and makes it so that no one is gonna die during early teamfights while still being able to win lane. It's such a dumb pick right now. If you are ever autofilled into bot lane, I highly suggest trying this out and watch as you just out-heal 3 champions worth of damage even if you're 100 CS behind. As for the setup, it's actually just the same as top lane Soraka. It's pretty simple, so you're welcome solo queue. Hopefully, support mains who are off-rolled will now choose to do this instead of their 30% win rate Ezreal, which for some reason is way more common than what it should be. Last up for the Q&A portion, we have the support S tier roster of Nautilus, Karma, Senna, Lulu, and Yuumi, and then in God tier we've got Thresh and Bardo. For the changes, we've got Soraka going from B tier to A tier. Post buffs, regardless of the role right now, Soraka is a beast even in High-ELO, and her pick rate went up from 2% to 7% this patch. And just like in the bot lane, I'm willing to predict it will continue to increase as this champion's kit currently is just far too problematic in my opinion. Like, I don't understand, if she isn't gonna lose a lot of HP for healing people, then the mana cost on her W needs to be increased because those flash crit heals are, you know, kind of like a Holy Paladin in WoW. They're keeping everyone up right now while being even easier to execute on Soraka's end. It's completely ridiculous. Nami, on the other hand, is an enchanter that's going to be moving down from A tier to B tier. She's one of the only ones who isn't doing well right now in High-ELO besides Sona. I mean, it kind of makes sense, her win rate and pick rate is plummeting right now, and it's because she's being outperformed by the rest of the enchanter class. That's pretty much what happened. It's not that she's particularly that much weaker, it's that other champions are doing her job significantly better. Specifically on that end, things like Soraka and now Karma, who is moving from A tier to S tier as one of the premier enchanter lane bullies, taking the place of Nami. It might seem a little bit weird, but she's one of the most popular supports right now with a 12% pick rate and a very good win rate of 53%. She's incredibly popular in the Korean and Chinese solo queue meta, more so than in the West, as they value her ability to bully lane and then transition into spamming her monster shield to help win teamfights pretty easily, because right now everyone's so bunched up trying to dive in on each other. One of the big things that helped her out is that she works well with pretty much any bot lane carry champion. You've got passive champions like Vayne, you've got aggro champions like Draven, whatever Aphelios counts as, mage bot laners like Syndra. She's very versatile in the laning phase, and ever since people swapped to taking Arcane Common over Aerie, she has more ability to impact the early game and more ability to snowball, which is fantastic for her because she does get outscaled by the other enchanters, although compared to non-enchanters, she still scales incredibly well into the late game. Starting up the Q&A section here, we'll be pulling questions from the Low-Elo tier list video. If you think this is actually a good idea or it isn't, let me know in the comment section below. But first up, for YouTube comments, we've got Cameron Aitken. I'm really sorry, I'm actually so bad with names. But your question is, why is Scorch being recommended on all the supports? If they're looking to scale, wouldn't Gathering Storm be significantly better? That's actually a really good question, as the logic is pretty sound, right? Enchanters are scaling champions, so they should take the scaling rune options, as they seem to have pretty good AP ratios on average, right? First up, before I explain why you're going to take Scorch or why Scorch is taken more often, let's talk about the stats, when we'll use Lulu as an example. Scorch is by far the most popular choice on her, even in silver, and it actually has a higher % win rate in that bracket too over Gathering Storm, and as you go up, the pick difference grows even larger and larger, although they remain somewhat even in win rate, but overall you barely see Gathering Storm post Diamond or on her unless it's like a very specific matchup. But why is that? Well, what it comes down to is how impactful each rune is at each stage of the game. Gathering Storm pretty much does nothing until 20 minutes and then really comes online at 30 plus minutes, but the average solo queue game is below 30 minutes in almost every ELO bracket. Even the ones where they don't, the game is almost pretty much decided before that point anyways. Let's look at the Enchanter class as a role though. They just struggle in the laning phase and then they outscale pretty much every other support post laning phase, especially in teamfights. This means that if you can survive the laning phase, you will probably just win teamfights no matter what your setup is. There's no need to take a rune that only comes online after the game is decided over a rune that can help you pressure lane easier. It would feel so bad to lose a 2v2 in the early game by 20 HP for an enchanter and then get snowballed on and not get to the late game than it would be to, for some reason, I don't know, not be able to protect someone by 20 AP. Like, it's more likely that you lose an early game fight because of lack of damage than it would be to lose a game because you couldn't save someone in a team fight because you were lacking a little bit of AP. That's why when playing things that scale naturally anyways, very similar to the theory on Kassadin, you should be picking stuff that allows you to lane easier knowing that you're going to win late game anyways. Our next question comes from Butterfutter Inc., who said, wait, do you put out the tier list with all servers in mind or just NA? We actually put the tier list out with all servers into consideration, and I even spent some time on a personal level checking out the Chinese solo queue meta by watching some streams and using Google Translate on their stats site, which is a real pain by the way because they lag so much for whatever reason. In terms of stats, we look on a global level as well, although I will mention we slightly cater towards EU West and NA, as they are our largest viewer and user base for our site, along with Latin America actually. Though, to be honest, when I say that, I can't really remember the last time, or at least any time, where this impacted the list at all. I think what it really comes down to is just me choosing to crack jokes with these two regions more often, using random memes or drama from them, rather than, you know, actually impacting any of the rankings. Though I do sometimes think it's funny to point out some stats like how NA Plat Twisted Fate is negative win rate, while every other region is around 50 to 51%. Just interesting to note the differences between regions sometimes, but it doesn't impact our list at all. Our first Instagram question comes from, I'm gonna call you Mike. How come Nautilus and Bard are not optimal? Alright, let's start off with Nautilus support. He's actually incredibly popular in any ELO bracket, but in gold specifically, he's ranked number 4. And for a good reason, he's incredibly versatile hook champion. People are able to, use him to get picks, roam, peel, engage, and tank. But in terms of effectiveness, he's only around a 50% win rate. This tends to be because he gets outscaled by some of the other optimal champs like Lulu, Soraka, Nami, meaning if he doesn't find that engage, he just isn't as effective, or quite frankly, the act of knowing how to engage and when can be tricky on the loyal list. So this is why Leona tends to do a little bit better in this bracket, as it's an easier time engaging on her, she's tankier, and the engage potential is more frequent, though, higher up the ladder you go, the more this kind of flip-flops. But still, either way. So to answer your question, Nautilus is close to S tier or optimal, and even though he's pretty simple to play, some of the other easier to play champions simply outscale him or easier to play post laning phase. As for my boy Bard, aka Albardo or Brad, he's just super hard and can often just end up trolling his own team with bad portals or poorly timed ultimates or just messing up stuns or just whiffing them. So his skill floor is quite high, along with knowing when to roam or grab chimes. There's a lot of stuff to this champion, and the fact that he does so well in low-elo right now is more of a testament to how overpowered he really is. And in fact, in high-elo, he's one of the top 2 best supports. That means that our last question comes from Matthias_Rowe, who asked, might I ask, why is Garen in S tier, or why did Garen go to S tier? Sure thing. A lot of why Garen is strong on now has to do with, well, I mean, he's always been strong in low-elo to start off. I should get that out of the way. He's got a very forgiving kit, he's tanky, he heals a lot out of combat, so you can't really poke him down as easily, and you can't really mess up his damage combo. But more recently, Riot decided to buff things like his W on 10.4 to make him tankier, and then, you know, they also increased his Q damage, as well as making his E scale off of attack speed and crit in earlier patches, along with making him actually stack Conquer with his E. All of this meant that Garen can now go Trinity Force into a Zeal item and still be tanky enough to run at people, but, you know, not die. This allows him to not be a useless mix of tank with no damage or CC, and instead walk up and one-shot people in a single RQ spin combo. His power comes from the fact that you need to actually kite him and be good at the game and space properly, and he doesn't have to do any of that. He gets on top of you and spins and you're dead. So the ease of execution is just way on his end. And so if he gets a lead, you can't really outplay him, especially if you're a melee champion, as his damage cannot be dodged or outplayed. So yeah, Garen is strong currently because he received a lot of buffs that allow him to be tanky while still building enough damage to one-shot you. Well, that's all I got though, so let us know what you think about the new format. If you like the Q&A section at the end, if you think we should actually rebuild questions from the previous high-elo tier list or the low-elo one, let us know if you think that we should spend a little bit less time actually describing how the changes went, or if we should focus more on our highlighted picks. I'm really interested to see what you guys like out of this content. But either way, be sure to check out our other content on this channel, as well as on our site at mobalytics.gg. As always, I'm your host, Adam Moriarty Isles, and may the new and old Silica gods be with you.